Hi, everybody, and welcome to Scrum Alliance User Group, Romania. My name is Amir Pellet. Danut and Alex are very glad to welcome you here. Many thanks to URL for hosting this event. Today, we are having a very special guest, namely Cherie Silas. Cherie, you are going to introduce yourself in a bit. I'd just like to make a personal note, because Cherie, you were my reviewer for the first part of my certified team coach. So thank you very much for your feedback.
You're welcome. Now,
let's roll on. And first of all, big welcome to Cherie from our side. The stage is yours, Cherie.
All right. Well, welcome, everyone. Can y'all give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Okay, good. Just making sure. So just a note that I'm in an airport, so if you hear a loud noise behind me of an announcer, sorry, I can't really control that, but it has been pretty quiet all morning, so I'll do the best I can. And so thanks for having me. I am going to talk to you today about building stronger relationships in your team. And as Amir said, my name is Cherie Silas, and I'm based in the US in Dallas, Texas. And I'm an enterprise coach and a professional certified coach. So I do a lot of coaching in my day-to-day world, and my favorite thing to do is to help train other people and teach others to be better coaches. So I've brought a topic today that I hope can help you in your endeavors as Agile coaches, Scrum masters, and managers. Yes, you have a question?
Cherie, today's topic is about team toxins.
Yes, it is.
Excellent. That's all right.
Yes, so team toxins is the short name for it. It's basically what we're going to talk about, and it's toxic communication strategy. So I'll just give you a little bit of background really quickly on healthy conflict and how toxic conflict can actually hurt a team. So one of the reasons why we're learning team toxins is to help improve those relationships. So as you can see up here, toxic communication in a team can actually make people not want to come to work, which I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that, because no one wants to work in a toxic work environment. But it's also a healthy conflict in a relationship is good. And it helps us to know that something's trying to happen. So we want to increase positive conflict in our teams and decrease negative conflicts. So John Gottman, who is a PhD, did some research, and he found that you need 5 positive interactions in order to offset 1 negative interaction. So this is the reason why we want to increase positivity and increase healthy interactions with our team, because it helps them to actually perform at a higher rate, at a higher performance rate. And last thing I want to tell you before we jump into team toxins is that to recognize that most issues in a relationship, whether it's a team relationship or a one-on-one relationship, conflicts, they actually can't be resolved. They're perpetual things. They're going to keep happening. So rather than trying to make conflict go away, what we want to do is actually manage conflict and make it into a positive interaction where we can have healthy conflict. And some of the things that can help that is repair bids, like actually being the one to bridge the gap if you are the one who creates a problem. Changing the way you start up a conversation, like instead of starting off rough and tough out the gate, stopping to think about how you're coming across before you jump in. And then by reducing toxic behaviors. So I'm putting this up on the screen here. And these are the 4 categories of toxic communication. So while you're looking over this, something to realize is that every one of us does these things. We all do them at some point. So just because someone is acting in a toxin doesn't make them an evil person. It just means they're human, and it's the only strategy they know to communicate in this moment. It's a reactive strategy that we all have at least one, and that is usually our go-to. So when we get frustrated or upset, we automatically go into that one. So if we look at the top left-hand corner, the first category here is blaming or criticizing. And this one is like an offensive. It's someone going after another person. They're attacking them. Bullying falls into this section. Dominating people, that command and control. I'm going to take over and tell everybody what to do. Ruling by fear. Those type of things, they all fall in this blaming and criticizing area. And defensiveness it looks a lot like criticizing, and it looks a lot like blaming. The difference is that it's a defensive measure. So where blaming attacks, defensiveness responds. And it's the same premise of they're getting the light off of them. So most people are really clear about what defensiveness is, but it could be that I'm not taking responsibility for my own actions, or I'm blaming someone else. I'm saying, nope, that's not my job, it's your job. It's not my fault, it's your fault. It's deflecting blame. Then down on the right-hand bottom corner, we have contempt. So contempt is particularly hurtful and harmful to relationships because it conveys a lot of disrespect. And so that's things like sarcasm and hostile jokes, humor, that intentionally is to cut someone. I know a lot of people and a lot of teams have some sarcasm that it's the fun way they communicate, and that's okay. We just want to watch for when it takes that turn and it becomes hurtful or mean or intentionally cutting. Contempt might also look like personal attacks on people's character, and eye rolling, like, when someone comes into the room, something like that. And then the last one is stonewalling. And stonewalling is basically when we check out and say, I'm not going to engage. I'm going to back out of this conversation, this conflict. It's disengaging. For some people, it's the silent treatment. I'm not going to talk to you because I'm mad for the next 3 weeks. It's avoiding talking about a topic or engaging in a topic, and withholding information. So this one can be bad for a team because people aren't sharing what they know and their ideas. It also falls into that space where we just follow the leader and do whatever the leader says, and I'm not going to give my own ideas. Sorry about that. I want to take some questions and thoughts from people who are in the meetup. And what are some of the things you notice about these categories? Any thoughts? I put up a couple of questions. So when you think about teams that you have been a part of in the past or relationships you've been in, what actually provokes these communication strategies to come out? Have you noticed specific things that happen that trigger these? Andre? No? Okay, that's fine. Um, so each one of these toxins, there's a belief behind the toxin. If you think about it, these are really intended to, they're self-protective or self-preservation. Okay. They're for self-preservation. So the intention is good. It's trying to be helpful. But what happens is because the person doesn't know a better way to communicate, it doesn't actually come across very well. So if we look at blaming or criticizing, here's a few things that are ways we can react that will help us to be in a different place. So the thing to remember about criticism is that it's actually an attempt to give useful feedback. So what the person is criticizing about is there's actually some validity there, and they're attempting to be helpful. They're just not very skilled in giving that feedback because they probably haven't learned a better way. So here are a few different ways that instead of criticizing someone, or when you hear someone on your team criticizing another person or another team, these are ways that you can actually respond. So remembering to talk about the behavior, not the person. To me, the most effective one is just turning that complaint into a request. So if you are feeling critical, or you are going to want to criticize something, complain about something, instead of complaining, just say what you actually want to happen. So don't complain that the team room is a mess. Instead, ask if someone can pick up their stuff and put it away. So it's kind of human nature for us to complain, but complaining doesn't help much. So when we actually ask for what we need, we get it. The opposite of that is when you hear someone complaining, to just ask them what they need. What is your request, or what is your need? Or listen for the request that's behind that complaint that they're not actually voicing. And ask, is what you need for me to do this? That way you can clarify what the need is and actually do something about it that will de-escalate the conflict. Focusing on what does the relationship itself, what does this team need to be successful? What does it need from us right now to be successful? Rather than thinking about what just individuals need. And then last is to be able to identify that you may be part of the problem. So what is your contribution to the problem? If they're complaining about something you did, then actually listening for the truth and identifying, well, what part of this frustration do I play? So I'd like to give y'all a couple of minutes here in the room to have a little bit of discussion around these four. So can you maybe partner up with someone who's next to you, and y'all take a look at these four and talk about which ones you think might be helpful for you to use with the groups of people you're working with right now. And then we'll come back and debrief.
Now, wait a minute. It would be really interesting to hear your opinion, because you've been looking into this subject. What would be one or two actions you would follow to address this sort of behavior? Because this is not all, right? These people be dealt with in some way. You can't just let it be as in, this is how it is. It isn't. I mean, when it goes to bullying, when it gets that, these people must be reported to management, right? Everything you can do as a person is to act professionally. If you hear criticism, just with a clear mind, just think about it. If that person, however that person is criticizing, is right, take stock of it, admit it, and deal with it professionally. That's all you can do as a peer. But if that person continues to be abusive, you can't deal with it as a peer. You have to have someone at a different level deal with it. So it would be interesting from an agile coach's point of view, being inward, how would you deal with that situation?
Mm-hmm. So when people are blaming or criticizing, it's not always at that level of, I need to report them to management. It's often just, someone's complaining, someone else broke the build, someone didn't check in their code. So it's not necessarily that they are being out of line to a point where you would report them to a manager. And maybe the conflict hasn't escalated to a fight, but you're trying to catch it before it gets negative so that you can use the conflict in a positive manner. So the fact that people are complaining, that's not actually a bad thing. That's actually a good thing, because it means they're starting to say what's actually true for them and what they mean. But what we don't want to get to is when, it's escalated in a negative way and people are fighting. So that's why a way to handle it is to ask, what is it that you want? What is it that you need? Or if you have a complaint, to complain about the specific behavior, not the person. So it's not the other person on the team. You're not complaining about they don't know how to do their job and they're a bad developer and they never check in their code and things like that. Instead, you want to complain about a specific behavior. I'm frustrated that everyone's code doesn't get checked in at the end of the day because it creates problems. You want to say something like that instead of blaming. Does that help?
No, but I mean, would you take that person aside, maybe, and have a chat?
Yeah, I would.
You are in a position to do it. Just have a nice conversation and just go through whatever had happened and get that person to realize that there are different approaches and different things. Because let's not forget, in the interviewing process, people have to actually prove that they can be teamwork. Right? They can together with others towards the goals of the company. This is huge. Right? So I think those people would have to be done separately in a professional way, just to see them sense. So it doesn't really.
Yeah, so you might pull them aside and talk to them, one-on-one. That way you're not doing things in front of the team. There are times when you might just ask in front of the team, like if they're complaining to the team about whatever it is, then you might just say, well, can you tell us what you need? So that wouldn't be embarrassing or confrontational. It would just be clarifying. If someone's complaining, to say, can you help us understand what you want us to do differently? So that's turning that complaint into a request. Identifying your contribution to the problem in front of a group, again, would be not huge, not a problem. It might sound like, I agree, we haven't been checking in the code every day. So what is it that you want to see happening? How can we fix this? So it doesn't mean that it's in a bad place. It's how you can actually handle the conflict and handle the criticism instead of allowing it to escalate. Okay. Great conversation. Thanks. So let's look at defensiveness. I'm sure each one of us have been in that place where we felt defensive. This seems to be one that happens often. So defensiveness is more reactive and deflecting, and it can escalate the conflict, because when you get defensive, you're kind of coming back and you know, in a negative way in response to what someone else has said or done. So it can escalate conflict and make it start to rise to a higher level. So here are some things that you might be able to do if you feel defensiveness. So if you feel like you're beginning to be defensive, you can repeat what you heard and ask the other person to clarify. So what I think I heard you say was that I'm not doing this correct. Is that right? So repeating what you heard, asking them to clarify. Because we often hear somebody will say one thing, but we hear something else. The perception of what that message is different. So we want to make sure that we've understood the message first before we get defensive. Search this one is search for the 2% truth in what you're hearing. This one is about recognizing that while we may not agree on everything, everyone does have a piece of the answer. Everybody is right, but only partially. And so there is some truth in what the person is saying. So it increases conflict when you look at what you don't agree on and fight about those things. Where you can decrease the level of conflict is to find the place where you can actually agree together, where you can say, yes, that's true. I believe that. I know that's true. And can we start from there? So it gives you a place to start the conversation where there's actually alignment, rather than starting the conversation from a place where there's a misalignment. So that can often help us to I guess, head off the conflict as it's escalating and bring it to a place where we can communicate. Number 3 is a lot like number 1. So you can either repeat what you heard and ask them to clarify, which would be number 1. Number 3 is ask them to tell you the message they believe they were sending and clarify it. So that might sound like you saying, I'm not sure I'm hearing you correctly. Can you tell me what message you're intending to send? Or that came across negative. Can you clarify what you're trying to say? So it's giving them a second chance to speak and listening for the message to see what it really is. And then there's active listening, which is always really helpful in any kind of conversation. So when we feel defensive, listening to understand rather than listening to respond. So if we're actually listening to understand what they're saying and asking questions about what they're saying, then we have the intention of hearing and understanding. But when we're in a defensive mode, we tend to hear something and only listen for the place where I can give an argument or a complaint. So instead of going into that mode where I'm not listening, we want to go into the mode of active listening, where I am trying to understand your viewpoint on this. You don't have to agree, but in order for you to communicate, you do have to make an attempt to understand the other viewpoint. So what are some thoughts about these? I don't know if you want to kind of partner up in the room there and talk a little bit about these, and then we can debrief. Or if you want to just call out some comments, either way works for me.
So what's your preference? To speak first and then to do a debrief, or to ask some questions? Questions? Okay. So the room.
No comment?
We might ask some questions, and this is where I'd like to reiterate that we also have some participants online, so feel free to unmute yourself and ask Cherie questions as well.
Yes, please. All right, I'm going to jump into the next one so you can get a full picture. So remember we talked about stonewalling, and that's when we cut off that communication with the other person. We don't want to engage. We kind of check out of the conversation. We don't, or a reluctance to communicate directly. So maybe I won't talk to you, but I'll tell the Scrum Master something and hope that the Scrum Master tells you. So that type of thing. But what stonewalling does is it actually feeds the other toxins. So when someone is stonewalling, it often provokes the other toxins to come up. People start blaming and criticizing, or they get defensive because they're, you won't talk to me, you won't share your ideas, so then they get defensive. So a few ways that you can handle stonewalling are these. So if you feel like you're ready to check out, you start seeing something happening, and if your natural response is to say, you know what, I'm not gonna engage in this, I'm gonna back up. When you start to feel that, take a minute, find a way to self-soothe. So for some people, that means taking a deep breath. For some people, it means taking a walk or going to get something to drink, something just to get away, to disengage for a minute. But what's important is that you come back and actually discuss the issue, whatever the issue is. Even if you say, well, let's make a time to talk about this tomorrow. But stonewalling is, I'm going to separate myself and I'm not going to come back and talk. So the way to break that is to have an intentional time to discuss this issue if you can't discuss it right now because it's too overwhelming. And then recognizing and helping the team to recognize that every voice is important. So what I said before about everyone being right, everyone having a piece of the puzzle or part of the solution. So when one person doesn't speak up, they actually hold back critical information that the team needs to make good decisions. So we want to create a space where everyone feels free to speak up and they feel safe to do so. So that might mean that you need to design safety conditions with your team. So in your working agreement, discuss how are we going to be when we have conflict? How are we going to communicate when there's conflict? And see if there's other toxins on your team. So are there people on your team who are responding defensively or who are criticizing? Or you'll see the contempt in the next slide. But if that's there, then having that conversation with the team. A great way to have this conversation with the team is to just take this information and relay it to them so that you can talk about what's happening while there's no conflict. The time to deal with conflict and help people learn how to communicate better is not in the middle of conflict. It's before the conflict occurs so that they actually have some language and some strategies to deal with it. So evaluating and seeing, are there other toxins that are there in our team? If so, then how will we handle them? How will we educate? So what are some thoughts about stonewalling? This is usually one that I hear a lot of people say, yeah, that's me. I do that all the time. Any thoughts on how?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Stonewalling is a natural reaction if nobody in the team reacts to a situation. If the person feels that his or her is by herself and the team doesn't support or intervene, then stonewalling, I guess, is a problem. I guess it's also a team problem. All of these behaviors become a team problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see often where the teams have multiple members that are in stonewalling. It seems to be the easiest one that people go to. So yeah, it's not just an individual problem. The whole team suffers when we don't communicate. And then this last one, oh, go ahead.
What should we do as coaches when we see that there are some disputes in a team, but they are not really speaking about it? They are just speaking out for a coffee, two of them, then you hear another two of them speaking about something else related to that, but they are not bringing it to the team. What to do then?
So what I usually do is just make the team aware of it. So I'm hearing different conversations about this item, but it's not, y'all aren't having a conversation with each other. So I'd like to create a space for y'all to be able to have this conversation. So just encouraging them to talk might be one way to handle it. Another way to handle it might be to, of course, acknowledge that they're not communicating and design some safety conditions. So maybe have a discussion about how can we communicate better? What kind of communication do we expect on our team? And maybe even do some values work. What are the values that we want to hold as a team that are going to kind of govern the way we work together? So even if it's just the Scrum values, what does openness look like on this team, and how can we create openness? What does respect look like on this team? How can we create that? And so on with the rest of the Scrum values. I find the Scrum values are an easy way to have this conversation because it's the Scrum values, right? If we're doing Scrum, it's the Scrum values, and those are the values that we say we want to live by. So often people don't know them. So it's a great teaching moment, and you can bring that in and start to have those discussions about what people need in order to live those values and to have those values present on the team.
So in this case, it would be advised to go to the whole team, or first, let's say, talk to the Scrum Master and see if he knows more about it, so he can go or she can go to the team. So what would be the best approach for an Agile coach in this situation?
Yeah, if you're the coach and there's a Scrum Master, you usually go to the Scrum Master first. That way, if they can handle it in the team, they will. And then if they're not able to handle it or don't feel comfortable, bring them with you and teach them how to handle it. And I don't know if you do any kind of training or anything. This could be a whole group training that you do, just doing something like this to teach about conflict and to talk about healthy conflict. It could also be something you present to your Scrum Masters and teach them about how to handle it. And then that way they can go back to their team and teach their team.
Okay.
And then contempt is a pretty bad one, usually, because it's, like I said, it tends to be really cutting. It's what someone said a bit earlier. It tends to be more unprofessional behavior. So often if people are in this space of contempt, these are times when you could be, getting a manager involved. Sometimes contempt comes out and it's just like a one-off thing, and it hasn't escalated. So they're starting to do these behaviors, but it hasn't really escalated yet. And if that's the case, you can definitely head it off. One of the ways that you can address it is, if you look at line 3 there, if someone they're in a team situation and they say something that sounds like contempt, you can ask them, can you help me understand your intention in saying that? What are you trying to accomplish by saying that? Something like that. So it does 2 things. First, it gives the intention to clarify, right? So help me understand what's going on here. Maybe they said something and it came across in a bad way, but the intention wasn't that. And if they intentionally said something in that, in that negative manner, and they were trying to, create conflict, it kind of calls them on that behavior. It puts them on notice that, we're not going to tolerate that here. I'm going to call you out on that behavior. We're not going to let you just talk that way. So it does a couple of things. And remembering that you may also be the person who is tempted to speak contempt. So you want to talk about behavior, not people, just like we said last time. Gossip is contempt. So when someone's coming to you to talk about other people, to gossip to you, helping them to recognize that you can help them figure out a way to go to that person and talk to them. You can go to them with them, but you're not going to get in the middle, and you're not going to just listen to the complaints. Do something. If you want to do something about it, then I'm happy to help you with that. But we don't want to allow people to create that gossip circle, because that just stirs up contempt. And then using I statements when you talk to someone. So instead of saying, you don't know what you're doing, you're not a good team member, instead of saying that, use your own I statement. And that can be in the form of impact feedback. So I am frustrated that you messed up this story 4 times. So you're taking responsibility for your response to their behavior, to someone's behavior, rather than acting with contempt to speak to them. So this is something you can teach them too. So if you hear people in your team, you did this, you did that, you can actually have them, teach them how to give I statements instead. And then the last one here is impact feedback. So impact feedback is a way to communicate the impact of someone's behavior so that you can open up a conversation. So it's got 4 steps. The first step of impact feedback is to give context. So for example, saying yesterday in the meeting, the stand-up meeting. So you're giving enough context to the other person so that they know what you're talking about. The second part of that statement is the behavior you observed. Not blaming, but just here's the facts, So yesterday in the stand-up meeting, I saw that you came in, when you got there, it was 5 minutes after we started, and you weren't sure what the state of your work was. Okay, something like that. Step 3 is my response to your behavior. So it's the impact that their behavior had on you, only you're taking responsibility for your own behavior. I got frustrated because I felt like we weren't able to plan well. I got, whatever it is, I got angry because we talked about this 3 times last week and you were still late. That whatever the I statement is. And then the 4th part of this is to open it up for conversation. So you're going to end that impact feedback with something like, can we discuss this? Or can I hear your perspective on this? Or how do you see it? So what you're trying to do is actually open up the lines of communication by giving that ability. Here's my perspective, but I don't only want to give you my perspective. I actually want to hear your perspective too. So some people find it most helpful to start with the part 4, the request for a conversation. So instead of starting with, here's what happened, here's how I responded, can we talk? They actually start with that can we talk at the beginning? I'd like us to have a conversation about what happened yesterday in the stand-up. I want to hear your perspective. From my perspective, I noticed that you came in 5 minutes late and you weren't prepared to tell the team what was going on with your story. I got frustrated because I didn't feel like we could plan well. What's your perspective? So that's what impact feedback would look like. And so that often one thing to note is that you can use any of these antidotes really with any of these toxins. So you might pick out a couple of them that seem to come naturally and that seem useful, like impact feedback could be used with anything. Something like recognizing that every voice is important. That could be good for anything, for any of these. Designing safety conditions can be good for any toxin. Active listening or clarification, those are good for any toxin. And I love the turning complaints into requests. That way, we're actually building something that we can move forward on. So I want to give you all time to ask any questions about any of these. I'll go back to contempt because that's where we were. But feel free to ask questions or make comments about any of these different toxins. Yes?
My name is
Hi.
I have a question. I'm working more on the coaching side. So I would like to ask about your opinion on those situations. You mentioned earlier about values and about our values. I was thinking of one of my managers and his team, and I wanted to ask you, what would be your approach as an agile coach in 2 situations? First one, the best performer has an unhealthy competition side, an unhealthy competition approach, and wants to have the entire life on him. And the second situation would be, what would be the second question would be what would be your approach as an agile coach when there is too much pressure on the project from the sponsor of the project, from the stakeholders, there is too much pressure on the results. And how would you help the team to get to the results everyone wants?
It was a bit hard to hear. So I know you were looking at understanding something from the Agile coach perspective. Could somebody who's a little bit closer to the microphone maybe repeat that?
Sure.
I'm sorry, it's just really hard to hear from back there.
It's okay? It's okay now?
Oh, much better. Yeah, great now.
So, I was thinking to one of my managers and some situation he encountered in his working project and with his team. The first question is, how would you approach as an agile coach a team member that is really high performer, and he wants to have the entire floor for him. He really wants to be in the light
all the time, like he's the only one who is working or getting results in that team. And the second situation is how would you deal as an agile coach when there is too much pressure from the sponsor of the project on the team you are coaching? The sponsor, the stakeholder, okay. It doesn't matter. It is too much pressure on the timeline, on the results.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. That was much clearer. So I think for the first one, where you've got a member of the team who's high performing, they're actually performing, the only one, then and they're like trying, I guess, showing everybody else up. I think I might talk to them separately and, you know, first, give them impact feedback in a positive way. So tell them that you're noticing that they're getting the work done, that they're high performing, that they have, you know, a great amount of skills on the team, and ask to have a discussion about how they could help to bring up the skills and the performance of the others on the team so that we could get even more done. So for me, that would probably be the first thing I would do, and then have that discussion. Then another thing that I might try would be, and maybe in a retrospective or something with the team, have a discussion about what we can as a team do to become become higher performing. So I would say make some observations about some of the things you're noticing, and they probably are noticing the same things. Maybe it's that they're not completing work in a sprint, or that they are producing buggy, defective work, and have a discussion about, well, how do we actually improve that, and how can we leverage the skills of one person to help? Maybe suggesting something like pair programming, where they can work together and actually increase that skill set. It could be a conversation about T-shaped team members, where we want to actually spread that knowledge to build that cross-functional team so that everybody has a piece of the puzzle. But having all of the information on one individual is pretty dangerous, because if they get sick or they quit, then you've got a big problem. And then for the second one, where there's too much pressure coming from the outside, maybe leadership or sponsors, managers, I think I would have the conversations. I guess it's two parts. So one is with the team of, there's a technique that I use that you may have seen, that it kind of looks like a bullseye. So I'll draw, it's like 3 circles. There's a small circle in the middle, a medium-sized circle around it, and then a big circle around that. And what those represent are, in the center there is what the team can actually control. What's in that middle space is what the team can influence, but management can control. And then what's beyond that is what management can influence. The team just has to live with it until it changes. And there's only people on the outside who can really handle that. So for the team, I would have them sort the issues into those categories so that they can focus on things they can change, and then influence leaders, figure out a plan to influence managers to focus on the things that the team can't change. So then the managers would either influence or actually make changes. And I'd have that same conversation with the managers. And if it is that manager that's the problem, or then asking them what they think the impact of their behavior is. And it might be a conversation about outcomes versus output. So do we want you know, are we more concerned about getting a bunch of stuff out the door, or are we concerned about meeting the client's needs and actually getting quality product? But I agree that is a very frustrating place to be, and it happens in every environment. Thank you for that. Anybody else have, and I'll flip back through these. So contempt. Any questions or comments on stonewalling? All right. How about defensiveness?
I have a question.
And then, yep.
How do I know when I become defensive?
You can usually feel it. Defensiveness, often you kind of feel that it kind of rises up in you, like it's this need to protect yourself. You might call it like the fight or flight impulse. I guess it's adrenaline really that kind of starts to flow in you, and you feel the need to defend yourself, to give an answer, or to protect yourself, maybe protect your name because you think someone's going to think bad about you. So you can usually feel that emotion coming up in you. And so if you go back and you think about times when you know you've been defensive, consider, well, what happened right before that, and you know, notice the things that happen in your body. And it may be that you notice specific words you're saying. So you might notice that you're saying, well, don't blame me, or don't tell me about that. That's not my problem. I didn't do that. Maybe you're noticing that. Maybe you're noticing that you're kind of blaming someone else, deflecting the blame.
Because right now in my team, we are kind of showing each other when we become defensive. But I'm afraid that in the team where I am right now, yeah, it's working. But when talking with someone else, then I would need more control because that someone will not tell me. And maybe he will become defensive on its own once he sees my reaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you feel the need to give an answer, like you couldn't, I think you know when you're defensive or not defensive, when you can hear what someone says and say, oh, thanks for that feedback, and be genuine, then you know you're not defensive. If they give you feedback and you feel a need to answer and correct them, then you're probably defensive. Mm-hmm. Thanks. Any thoughts or questions on this one?
I have a question on this one on criticism. But first of all, Danute's questions before that, I want to say, Danute, I'm not defensive, you're defensive. And the question is, okay, I think it's a very good approach to turn the complaint into a request, right? When you feel you want to criticize someone, better ask them to do something instead of criticizing what they've done previously, right? This is how I read it. The question is, what to do when this behavior repeats? Because what builds conflict is similar situation coming over and over and creating a bigger impact. Like a team member not doing what he's supposed to be doing, like not checking in, might receive first a request from the team or from the coach. Well, could you please check in? And second day the same. Maybe they speak into a retrospective and they agree, yes, we all should check in
before we leave. And this situation is acknowledged by everyone. It's recognized as an attribution or a responsibility of every team member, and still that person fails to do the task. Point. What's from your experience a good approach to manage conflict?
And are you the coach outside of the team, or are you actually on the team?
Let's say you work with the team, like Scrum Master, you're an Agile coach to the team.
Okay. So to me, this is a issue that the team should address. So working with the team to address it, because you don't want to always jump in and say to them. What we do want to teach them is that they need to speak up if behavior is acceptable or unacceptable. And so you might, if you're going to address this, you might address it by bringing it to the team. So I'm noticing that we've been talking about checking in code daily, but it's still not happening. So what do we need to do to solve this problem? Or is this acceptable? So the team needs to first decide together, every person, is it acceptable? Are we okay not checking in code daily? And if it is, then let the team deal with those repercussions. If it's not acceptable, then the team needs to figure out how they're going to solve making that happen. But if there's 5 people on the team and one person doesn't agree that they need to check in code every day, you do need a discussion about it. So tell people who are on the side of you must check in code every day, let's hear your thoughts and let's hear your, your arguments for. And then person who doesn't believe that you need to check in code, let's hear your arguments against. And then it may even be a discussion of what do you need. That person who's not checking in code, they might actually need something they're not getting. They might need help. Maybe they're having trouble with the work. Maybe there's a skill set gap. And maybe they felt like people are just forcing them to do something that they never agreed to and they want to be heard. So they're just going to keep ignoring the rule until someone listens to them.
Makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We have another.
Yeah, I have a question.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Nikolai,
yeah.
What do you do as an agile coach when you realize or just find out that a recurring bad behavior is due to a medical situation? And what the...
So, you're cutting out. I'm not hearing your question. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay, so what would you do as an agile coach if you realize or find out that recurring bad behavior is due to a medical situation and will not go away?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this one comes up a lot, actually, in the environment I am. There's often people who are on the autism spectrum in this career, so that happens often. And then, of course, there could be other illnesses that create that. I think it depends on the person who's creating that or who's bringing that toxin. Number one, if they are open and okay telling the team that this is my condition and this is where I'm at, then that is the best case scenario, because now the team can have a discussion around how to work with them. So what does that person need from the team? And that may just be for the team to say, hey, you're doing that thing again. So what does that person need from the team? And then what does the team need from the person? And when conflict arises or this toxic communication arises, how are they going to address it as a team? So they need some language around what are they going to do. And it could be something as simple and fun as having, you know, like an easy button that says some crazy thing and somebody on the table, somebody just hitting it when this problem is coming up. That would be for the team to solve. If it is, so that's best case scenario, if the person is willing to discuss their condition with the team and tell them this is what's happening. In the scenario where the person won't admit or tell the team that there is a problem, and even maybe you're just assuming there's a sickness that's creating the problem, would be to individually talk with them and probably use impact feedback to show them what's happening and ask them how can we make some changes. You might also have to have conversations with them often, asking, how do you think what you just did impacted the rest of the team? And what would you prefer to do differently next time? So you may have to actually have those conversations more than once, because if they've got some medical or other condition that is creating this, they may actually not know a better way of communicating. So you might have to help teach them how to communicate better.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions, comments? Okay. And really quickly, here's some next steps that you could take. So educating the team about these toxins, this is a topic that any company, any team can use, and they're usually really interested, and they usually have a whole lot of fun saying, yeah, that's me, no, that's you, talking about the different ones, because everybody does recognize themselves in them. Acknowledging that these toxins, they're a part of normal behavior, but we can't ignore them. Just because they're normal doesn't mean they're okay. So we need to address them and figure out better ways of communicating. So teaching better ways to communicate by using some of the antidotes and creating protocols, conflict protocols, working agreements for what are we going to do when this stuff happens. And to me, the biggest part of the education, so number one, is the bottom one, that we actually now have some language that we can use to describe the behavior that's happening and to address it. So agree that we're going to call it what it is. Hey, are you stonewalling again? Or hey, I'm stonewalling. Or what I hear often is I'm feeling defensive. So let me take a breath, and can you help me understand what you are trying to communicate? So give them a language to use that can help them communicate better. So last question for me to you is, what can you do differently with this information that you have? What are some ways that you might bring this back into your workplace? Any thoughts?
I'm Christian, and I see this toxins like following. I think blaming and defensiveness is more like a skill set. So basically, you should, alright, I will do it like trainings with the team, maybe do feedback, how to communicate, a non-violent communication model or something like that. And the content, I think, is more like a personal behavior. So basically, if the people are really introverts, it's really hard to, or easy to go there, and it's really hard to address that situation. So, of course, a lot of stuff in the safe environment. But related to content, I think in development teams where are really young and usually new developers, the sarcasm is something like normal. For sure, I am aware about it, and in some way I tolerate it, because other than that, I think will not be a real relationship. So basically, if the team agree with the amount of sarcasm or they all knowledge about it, I think it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask you about, what do you think about justify? Because for me, this is also some kind of toxic. All the time justifying that some other impediment were in the middle of commitment or in the stream. It wasn't us, it wasn't me. It's not my or I try to, but the behavior, justifying behavior. I try to solve it, but
justifying the behavior
exactly.
is actually defensiveness. So when we feel that need to justify our behavior and prove the other person wrong or why I'm right, that's actually defensiveness.
Okay.
So that could be.
It's not an attack directly. It's just saying that it's not a direct attack, you're the fault or something like that. It's just justifying his action. So basically, it is more or less a toxin, but it's not that easily recognized, because you might think that it was an impediment there or something like that. So basically, he starts to justify all the time, or the team justifies their lack of commitment or something like that.
Yeah, so that's that not willing to take responsibility of their own actions. So that might be, if you want to write this down, there's a teaching called the, what is it? Responsibility model. And you should be able to just Google it, responsibility process, I think is what it's called. And it's a way that you can talk to your team about ownership and the different path that you kind of go through until you take responsibility. So that could be another good teaching that. It's Chris Avery is the name of the person who wrote that. And it's called the responsibility process. And it may be in his book, Team is an individual action or something like that. I'm sorry, I wasn't intending to say anything about it, so I didn't go look it up. But I know it's Chris Avery, and it's a really good model.
But do you think it is a toxin or not?
Oh yeah, I definitely think it's a toxin. I think it's defensiveness.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. Can't really see, but it looks like no other comments, questions. Okay. Yeah. Well then, if not, Amir, I'll hand it back over to you.
Just curious to find out whether there are some questions from people who joined us online. If yes, please unmute yourself. Okay. Take it as a no. So, Cherie, I would like to take this opportunity to say big thank you from our side to agreeing to be our speaker today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed being here and bringing this topic. So.
Pleasure is ours. And looking forward to hearing from you soon. Take care.
Okay, thank you. All right, bye-bye.
So what will happen next? We have some goodies over there, some things to drink, and networking opportunities. So let's go for it.
And many thanks to the guys that are online. One more thing, I am trying to put up a place where we have all our videos and documentation, because on Meetup they are kind of lost. I will send an email with that repository once I have it to all the members of the Meetup group.
Later on tonight. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.